Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Quiet Admission. The rain had begun as a thin, uncertain drizzle when Hercule Poirot stepped out of the cab, but by the time he reached the entrance of St. Augustine's clinic, it had grown confident and steady, pattering briskly against the glass canopy above the door. He paused for a moment, carefully adjusting the brim of his hat and the fold of his coat, as if even the weather ought not to find him in disarray. St. Augustine stood slightly apart from the city, perched on a gentle rise, its pale stone facade softened by climbing ivy and rows of orderly shrubs. It did not have the intimidating bulk of a great London hospital, rather, it suggested comfort, discretion, and the well-controlled sort of suffering that belonged to the well-to-do. A brass plaque near the entrance bore its name in restrained lettering, just polished enough to catch the light. Poirot glanced at it, then at the door, and nodded to himself. This, Hastings would say, is the place where the rich come to be repaired, he murmured, and stepped inside. The reception hall was quiet, too quiet, he thought, for a place filled with the sick and the anxious. There were no raised voices, no hurried footsteps, no clatter of trolleys. Instead, there was the soft hum of distant machinery, the faint click of typewriter keys somewhere behind a half-closed door, and the whisper of rubber-soled shoes on polished flooring. The air smelt faintly of antiseptic and something subtler, perhaps lavender, from the arrangements of flowers placed with deliberate regularity along the walls. A young woman in a crisp uniform rose from behind the reception desk as he approached. "Good morning, sir. May I help you?" He inclined his head. "You may indeed, mademoiselle. I am Hercule Poirot, and I have the honor of an appointment with Dr. Lionel Rathbone." Recognition flickered in her eyes, it was swiftly followed by a trace of unease. "Yes, sir. Dr. Rathbone asked to be informed the moment you arrived." She picked up the telephone, spoke a few quiet words into it, and replaced the receiver. "If you would like to wait just a moment, sir, the doctor will be here." Poirot thanked her and moved aside, taking in the hall as he waited. The chairs were comfortable but not ostentatious, the paintings on the walls tasteful but unremarkable. Everything spoke of money used with restraint, of people who disliked fuss but appreciated quality. It was, in its way, a perfect mask. Masks, Poirot knew, were never limited to buildings. "Monsieur Poirot." He turned to see a man striding toward him, tall, spare, and grey-haired, with a neat moustache and the kind of upright posture that spoke of long years spent in authority. His face, however, seemed drawn and tired, as though sleep had been a stranger. "Dr. Rathbone." Poirot stepped forward and offered his hand. "It is good of you to receive me so promptly. It is good of you to come at such short notice." The doctor shook his hand firmly. "I confess, I hesitated before calling you. St. Augustine's has a reputation for privacy, and I do not lightly invite outside eyes." But, he paused, choosing his words with care. "But I find myself troubled." Poirot's head tilted slightly. Troubled, doctor, is often a more accurate word than the puzzled or concerned. Troubled suggests that the mind and the conscience are not entirely in agreement, n'est-ce pas? Rathbone gave a faint, humorless smile. "I suppose you might say so. If you will come with me, we can talk in my office." They walked along a corridor lined with closed doors, each bearing a discreet brass number. Nurses passed them with quiet efficiency, some nodding respectfully to the doctor. Others pretending not to notice the small, dapper stranger at his side. Poirot observed them all. "They move well," he remarked softly. "Orderly, precise. You run a tight ship, doctor." "We must," Rathbone replied. "Our patients are influential. A scandal here would be unfortunate." Ah. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And you fear a scandal? I fear something worse. I fear a mistake, or worse than that, a crime committed under my nose. They reached the doctor's office at the end of the corridor, a room that seemed to mirror its owner, tidy, serious, and efficient. Books lined one wall, another was filled by a large window overlooking the rain-spattered grounds. The desk was bare save for a few papers, an appointment book, and a telephone. "Please, sit," Rathbone said, closing the door behind them. Poirot seated himself, adjusting his cuffs with care. The doctor took the chair opposite and, for a moment, stared down at his hands. "Last night," he began, "one of our patients died. His name was Sir Andrew Whitmore." Poirot nodded slowly. "A name I know. A man of industry, of finance, with a talent for acquiring enemies." "Quite." Rathbone's mouth tightened. "He was admitted a week ago for observation. He had suffered a mild cardiac event, a warning, really. His condition was stable, his prognosis good. We anticipated no immediate danger. Yet he is now, as you say, dead." "Yes." The doctor hesitated. "Officially, it will be reported as heart failure in the night. It would be the simplest explanation. But I am not convinced." "Tell me, then," Poirot said quietly, "what convinces you otherwise?" Rathbone got up and crossed to the window, though there was little to see beyond the blurred shapes of trees and the grey smear of the sky. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its professional detachment. "I saw Sir Andrew at 8 o'clock last evening. He was irritable, complaining about the food, the temperature, the newspapers, his wife, his nephew, his lawyers, almost everything one could imagine. But physically, he was stable. His latest tests were encouraging. We had adjusted his medication, his breathing was clear, his rhythm steady. I had no reason to believe he was in any immediate danger. At 11, he went on, the night nurse checked on him. He was reading and preparing to sleep. At midnight, a sedative injection was administered, routine, nothing out of the ordinary." "By whom?" Poirot asked. "Nurse Clara Dalrymple. One of my most reliable nurses. She has been here for years. And after midnight. At 6 in the morning, the night attendant, Edgar Price, entered to take the usual observations. Sir Andrew was dead." Poirot's eyes remained fixed on the doctor. "And the position of the body?" "The room?" "Unchanged. The bedclothes hardly disturbed. His face was peaceful, almost unnaturally so. There were no signs of struggle, no attempt to call for help. The call button by the bed was untouched. That," Poirot observed softly, "is curious indeed. A man whose heart fails suddenly in the night, he may feel something, a pressure, a pain, a dread. Often he reaches out, if only instinctively. Yet here we have the calm of the statue." Rathbone nodded. "Exactly. I listened to his chest, there was no rhythm, of course. But the faint bluish tinge around his lips suggested something more than simple heart failure. There was no obvious cause, yet everything in me protested that it was not natural." "And you have no explanation?" "None that I can prove." The doctor sat down again, slowly. "He received only the prescribed medication. Our records are precise. The sedative used was standard, in the correct dose, from a secure cabinet. No error in dosage, no mixing of drugs. And yet, Poirot echoed, "a man who should live dies, quietly, without alarm, in a clinic where nothing is out of order." He leaned back, fingertips pressing together. "Who knows that you doubt, Doctor?" Rathbone hesitated. "Only a few. Myself. Nurse Dalrymple, because she was present this morning. The pharmacist, Miss Evelyn Brooke, because I insisted on rechecking the vials. Lady Whitmore has been told only that her husband passed away in the night. She has not questioned it, yet. And the nephew? Charles Whitmore? He has not yet arrived. He is expected later today. Poirot's eyes drifted to the telephone on the desk. Then, for the moment, we have a death that is not publicly suspicious, in a place where suspicion is dangerous. Rathbone met his gaze. I want the truth, Monsieur Poirot. If there has been negligence, I must know. If there has been malice, murder, I will not have St. Augustine's used as a weapon. I called you because you are discreet, and because you have a reputation for seeing what others overlook. Poirot stood, smoothing his waistcoat. You do me honor, Doctor. Very well. Hercule Poirot will examine your clinic, your staff, and your dead man. He will look at your order and your silence, and he will see whether they are truly as innocent as they appear. He paused, then added quietly, and if there is a murderer here, rest assured, he or she will not remain among your patients for long. Rathbone's shoulders sagged a little, as though some of the burden had shifted from him. Thank you, he said simply. Would you like to see the room? Indeed, Poirot replied. We begin always at the place where the life ended. After that, we may concern ourselves with where the motives began. As they left the office and walked once more into the silent corridor, Poirot allowed his gaze to travel along the smooth, gleaming surfaces, the closed doors, the quiet figures moving with practiced calm. To an untrained eye, it was a sanctuary of science and care. To Poirot, it was something else as well, a carefully controlled stage upon which, in the small hours of the morning, someone had performed an act of death so quiet that not even a call button had been pressed. It is very neat, he murmured to himself. Perhaps a little too neat. And with that thought, he followed Dr. Rathbone toward the room where Sir Andrew Whitmore had slipped from the world without a sound. Chapter 2, The Room Too Calm. The corridor leading to Sir Andrew Whitmore's room felt even more hushed than the rest of the clinic. The lights were muted, set into the ceiling in a way that softened shadows and removed harsh edges. Along the walls, framed prints of landscapes and sea views had been selected, no doubt, for their supposed calming effect. Private rooms are down this wing, Dr. Rathbone said quietly. We pride ourselves on peace. No noise, no chaos. Peace, Poirot murmured, is an excellent thing, Doctor. But it is also an excellent cover. One must never forget that. They stopped at a door marked with a discreet brass plate, Room 14. Dr. Rathbone hesitated just a fraction before opening it. Poirot noticed this, as he noticed the faint tightening of the man's mouth and the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders. Whatever the doctor had seen that morning, it had shaken him. The room itself was not large, but it was comfortable. A single bed stood near the window, its metal frame softened by white linen and a neatly folded blanket. A bedside table held a glass, a water jug, a shaded lamp, and a small stack of magazines. There was a chair near the bed, another by the wall, and a slim wardrobe by the corner. The curtains were half drawn, filtering the grey daylight into a pale wash. For a moment, Poirot simply stood and looked. He had often said that a room, like a face, betrayed the emotions and events it had recently witnessed. This one, at first glance, revealed very little. There were no overturned objects, no scattered sheets, no signs of haste or violence. If one did not know, one might have thought the occupant had checked out briefly and would return at any moment. But Poirot knew. If you do not mind, he said softly, I would like to be alone in here for a few minutes. Of course. Rathbone stepped back. I shall send Nurse Dalrymple to you shortly. She can tell you about the night routine. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, Doctor. And if you please, no one else enters here without my knowledge. At least, not until I have satisfied myself that your room is as innocent as it seems." The door closed behind the doctor with a gentle click. Poirot moved forward, his footsteps almost noiseless on the polished floor. He did not touch anything at first. His eyes, sharp and methodical, travelled from object to object, corner to corner, acquiring details and fitting them together as though assembling a puzzle. The bed was made with careful precision. The sheets were smooth, the blanket pulled tight. Whoever had arranged it after the discovery of the body had done so with reverent efficiency. "Too efficient," Poirot murmured. "The scene, it has been tidied. This is most unfortunate. Still, not everything could be erased." He bent slightly and inspected the pillow. It was plumped, its case smooth, yet there was a faint irregularity in the way it settled into the mattress, as if it had been handled more than once in quick succession. The sheet beneath showed the slightest ripple, barely visible. He straightened, eyes turning to the bedside table. The glass was half full, clear water catching the light. The jug was 3/4 full. No residue, no cloudiness. The magazines were stacked with the edges neatly aligned, the Times, an illustrated weekly, and a financial journal. The topmost page of the newspaper had its corner turned down, marking an unfinished article. "Sir Andrew reads of markets and mergers until the last," Poirot observed gently. "Money, always money. Even in a hospital bed, the thoughts are not of health but of advantage." Moving to the wall near the bed, he examined the call button. It was built into a small panel, a round, raised disc clearly designed to be found easily, even in the dark. Simple. Visible. Within reach. Poirot's fingers hovered above it without pressing. A man who cannot breathe, he sees this, he feels this, and yet it remains untouched. That, to Poirot, was perhaps the most eloquent object in the room. He crossed to the window. Outside, the rain had eased into a fine drizzle. The grounds of St. Augustine's stretched beyond, a sweep of lawn, hedges trimmed to geometric neatness, a few solemn trees, their branches dripping. The window was closed, the latch properly fastened. Poirot ran a finger lightly along the frame. A faint trace of dust clung to his glove. "No one has opened you in some time," he murmured. "So our murderer did not come climbing in the night like a thief in a melodrama. No, he uses the door, the corridor, the uniform possibly. He uses the appearance of routine." He turned to the wardrobe. There, Sir Andrew's clothes hung in orderly fashion, a dark suit, a lighter one, shirts carefully folded on the shelf, ties rolled with the pride of a man who had always dressed to display authority. On the top shelf was a leather briefcase. Poirot lifted it down and opened it. Inside were neatly arranged documents, letters, and a slim ledger. "Business follows him even here," Poirot muttered. He picked up a letter on top. It was from Sir Andrew's solicitors, dated 2 days earlier, confirming that a revised draft of his will was ready for signing. "Ah," Poirot breathed. "So, he changes his testament. That is interesting. That is more than interesting. That is dangerous." He replaced the documents exactly as he had found them and shut the case. His grey-green eyes were now brighter, the little grey cell stirring. A soft knock came at the door. "Entrez," Poirot called. The door opened to admit a woman in a nurse's uniform. She was in her early 30s, with an earnest, pale face, light brown hair pulled neatly back, and eyes that attempted to look calm and professional but could not quite hide their strain. "Nurse Clara Dalrymple?" Poirot asked. "Yes, sir." She closed the door softly behind her. "Dr. Rathbone said you wanted to speak with me." "Indeed." Poirot gestured to the chair by the bed. "If you will be so kind as to sit. I do not wish to tire you by making you stand while I interrogate you." His tone was gentle, almost playful, but his gaze was unwavering. She sat, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "You were on duty last night," he began. "Yes, sir. I oversee the evening round for this wing. I checked on Sir Andrew at 11. He complained about the broth at supper, as usual, but otherwise he was in good spirits. Well, good by his standards. He was not an easy man to please." "No?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Tell me." He was demanding. Wanted certain newspapers, specific tea, particular pillows. He disliked the way the porter walked, said his footsteps were deliberately provocative. That sort of thing. Such men, Poirot said, are often very precise in what they do and do not want. They notice small irregularities. Did he, for example, complain of any symptom last night? Any shortness of breath, pain, dizziness? No. He said he felt restless, but that was usual for him. He never enjoyed being told to rest. And the sedative was given at midnight. Yes. He asked for it early, around 11:30, but I told him we had a schedule and must keep to it. He grumbled, but accepted it. Who fetched the injection? I did. I went to the medication room, took the vial prepared and labelled by Miss Brooke, the pharmacist, and brought it back here. I checked his chart, his wristband, confirmed the dose, and administered it. Then I noted it in the records. You gave the injection yourself? Yes, sir. In his upper arm. He winced and asked why we could not simply give him a whiskey. I told him alcohol would not agree with his medication. He muttered something about doctors being cowards. And after the injection, he lay back, still reading his paper. I dimmed the lights and asked if he needed anything else. He said no. I left at about 10 past midnight. And you did not see him again until this morning, when Mr. Price called for help. Her face tightened. He was so calm, sir. When I saw Sir Andrew, so still, so pale, it did not seem real. We tried, of course, but there was nothing to be done. Poirot regarded her in silence for a moment. Tell me, Nurse Dalrymple, in your view, was he a man who would accept his fate quietly? If he felt himself dying, would he lie still like a lamb, or would he rage and demand every possible attempt to save him? She did not hesitate. He would rage. He would ring the bell, shout, bang the wall if he had to. He would not slip away politely, sir. It was not in his nature. Just so. Poirot nodded. And yet, you see, he gestured to the silent panel beside the bed, the bell, it remains unpressed. The sheets, they are hardly disturbed. It is as though he never had the chance to be afraid. Nurse Dalrymple swallowed. What are you saying, Monsieur Poirot? I am saying, Poirot replied softly, that your patient did not die as a man normally dies in his sleep, nor as a man dies in sudden agony. He died in silence. And silence, mademoiselle, can sometimes be the loudest note of all. Her eyes widened, and Poirot, satisfied that her reaction was genuine, changed the subject with gentle tact. Did Sir Andrew receive any visitors yesterday? He asked. Yes. Lady Whitmore came in the afternoon, as she did every day. She stayed about an hour. They argued. Poirot's brows rose. And you know this how? We could hear raised voices in the corridor. She flashed slightly. We do not listen on purpose, sir, but sometimes one cannot help it. Later, their nephew, Mr. Charles Whitmore, came in the evening. He did not stay long. 10 minutes, perhaps. And after the nephew? No one else, sir. Visiting hours ended at 8. After that, only staff could enter. Poirot turned slowly, looking once more at the bed, the window, the call button. Thank you, Nurse Dalrymple. You have been very helpful. One more thing, have you ever known Miss Brooke, the pharmacist, to make a mistake? Nurse Dalrymple frowned slightly. No, sir. She is very exact. Some might say too exact. Everything in its place, every bottle, every record. She does not like questions about her system. Ah, Poirot said softly. People who cannot bear questions do not always enjoy the answers. He smiled reassuringly. You may go for now. But please, mademoiselle, do not speak of my doubts to others yet. Let us keep our little secrets between us, Hein. I understand, sir, she said quietly, and left. When the door closed, Poirot stood alone once more in the silent room. A man who should live, he repeated under his breath, who does not press the bell, who does not struggle, who dies with the calm imposed upon him. His eyes settled, thoughtful, on the pillow. If the body does not speak, the method will. And somewhere in this clinic of order, there is a mind that has used that order to kill. He adjusted his tie, his expression now one of quiet determination. It is time, he said, to meet the grieving widow and the expectant heir. And with that, Poirot left the room that was far too calm for a place where a man had died. Chapter 3, Family Ties and Fractures. Lady Eleanor Whitmore arrived at St. Augustine's clinic just after midday, stepping out of a sleek black motorcar with the air of a woman who did not merely visit hospitals, but inspected them. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark tailored coat, her gloves perfectly matched, her hat angled with mathematical precision. One might have assumed she was attending a meeting of the board rather than viewing her husband's body. Hercule Poirot observed her entrance from the corridor near the reception desk. He had been waiting, not idly, but with the patient attentiveness of a cat watching a mousel. When Lady Whitmore walked past, she did so without acknowledging anyone beyond a curt nod for the nurse who held the door. Poirot noted the absence of tears, but also the absence of triumph. Grief, like deception, had many shades. Dr. Rathbone approached her with solemn courtesy. Lady Whitmore, I am deeply sorry for your loss. If you wish, we can allow you a moment with... That won't be necessary, she interrupted with a controlled, almost delicate iciness. I saw Andrew yesterday afternoon when he was very much alive. Poirot's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Most widows did not announce such statements with such punctual detachment. Rathbone cleared his throat. In that case, you may speak with Monsieur Poirot. He is assisting us in understanding the circumstances of Sir Andrew's passing. She turned to Poirot as though appraising a new piece of furniture that had suddenly appeared in her drawing room. And you are? Hercule Poirot, madam, he said with a small bow. At your service. A flicker of recognition touched her expression, not admiration, but calculation. Yes, I believe I have heard the name. Scotland Yard consults you from time to time. Though I had not imagined detectives frequented clinics. Death, Poirot said gently, walks in many places, madam. Sometimes even through the corridors of the very best medical establishments. That earned him a very small, very cold smile. We may sit, if you wish, she said. Without waiting for agreement, she moved toward a set of high-backed chairs near the window. Poirot followed, settling into the seat opposite her, placing his gloved hands neatly upon his knees. Madam, he began softly, Dr. Rathbone has told me that you visited Sir Andrew yesterday afternoon. Every afternoon, she corrected. My husband was not an easy man to please, but one must fulfill one's duties. Poirot inclined his head. Your husband was a man of business, of considerable means and ambition. He was a man obsessed with acquisition, she replied. He collected companies the way others collect art. And did Madame approve of such acquisitions? Approve? She gave a soft laugh. It hardly matters. Andrew rarely sought approval. He consulted no one. He made decisions and expected others to live with them. Poirot studied her face, the line of her jaw, the tension around her eyes, the lack of tremor in her voice. She was composed, yes, but not empty. Something simmered beneath. Was there, perhaps, a matter of recent importance? Poirot asked. A matter that troubled Sir Andrew? A merger, maybe. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Andrew was in the midst of securing a hostile takeover of Whitmore and Kenton, another industrial firm. He intended, quite ruthlessly, to dismantle it and absorb its assets. And the displeasure for this, it was widespread. It would have been ruinous for several people, she said with sudden sharpness. Including his nephew, Charles, who fancied himself Andrew's eventual successor, but who never understood the business half as well as he imagined. Poirot tapped one finger lightly against his knee. And you, madam? How did this matter affect you? She gave a tight smile. The company was Andrew's pride. I was expected to play hostess, occasionally smile at board dinners, and otherwise remain beautifully uninformed. Poirot leaned slightly forward. Dr. Rathbone tells me Sir Andrew was revising his will. Her lips compressed into a hard line, but she did not pretend ignorance. So he was, she admitted. He informed me, quite calmly, that he intended to increase the nephew's share in the event he could not complete his merger in time. It was, I think, a petty attempt to secure his legacy beyond the grave. And you disagreed. I disagreed with many things, Monsieur Poirot. But marriage is a matter of tolerating what one cannot change. Her voice dipped into something more brittle. Do not mistake me. I did not love Andrew. But I had no reason to wish him dead. His death complicates matters far more than it simplifies them. Poirot regarded her steadily. Most people, madam, say precisely the opposite after losing a difficult spouse. She did not flinch. Most people are liars. Poirot allowed a small pause to settle between them, like dust on polished glass. And your nephew, Mr. Charles Whitmore, he visited as well. She gave a dismissive gesture. Charles came for 10 or 15 minutes. He and Andrew argued. They always argued. But Charles was never dangerous, only exasperating. Poirot's voice softened further. And you, madam, did you argue also? Lady Whitmore's cheeks flushed slightly, though she fought it. The walls in this place are quite thin, I see. Yes, we argued. Andrew was furious that the doctors restricted his whiskey. He accused me of conspiring to tame him. I told him he was a fool to consider mergers when his heart was in no fit state, and that he would ruin us all. He accused me of wanting him in the grave. I told him I wanted him in the country house, recovering, not here, barking at nurses and chasing stock prices. Poirot listened carefully to the rhythm of her speech, to the parts she quickened and slowed. A good quarrel, he reflected privately, revealed more truths than a polite supper. And when you left him yesterday, what was his mood? Defiant, she said without hesitation. He insisted he would sign new documents soon. He believed that nothing could touch him, not the doctors, not the shareholders, not even his own body. She stared toward the window for a long moment before adding quietly, "It turns out his body had other plans." Poirot did not correct her. Instead he asked, "Did your husband have enemies outside of business?" "Only the kind that wear expensive suits and send polite letters," she replied. "Nothing melodramatic." "And you, madam, will you remain in the city after arrangements are made?" She sighed. "There will be a funeral. Then there will be solicitors. Then there will be vultures. I shall remain as long as necessary." Poirot observed her fingers twisting the strap of her handbag, the first genuine sign of tension she had shown. "Tell me, Lady Whitmore," he said quietly, "when you received the news of Sir Andrew's death this morning, what was your first thought?" She did not answer at once. When she did, it was not with the brittle cleverness she had displayed before, but with something closer to exhaustion. "I thought," she said, "of course. He leaves the battlefield early, and I must tidy the war." There was, Poirot knew, more truth in that than most confessions delivered with tears. "Thank you, madam," he said gently as he stood. "You have helped me to see Sir Andrew more clearly, and the world around him." As she rose, she met his eyes once more. "Do you suspect foul play, Monsieur Poirot?" He smiled politely. "I suspect only that a man who dies quietly in the night seldom does so without reason." Without waiting for her reply, he bowed once more and left her standing by the rain-streaked window. Chapter 4 of the Night Staff. Dr. Rathbone escorted Poirot toward the administrative wing, where the night logs and staff schedules were kept. Along the corridor, the lighting grew softer, transitioning from clinical efficiency to the dim hush of night duty, a place designed for minimal disturbance and maximum order. "Nurses change shifts at 7, he explained quietly. "Night attendants at 6. Pharmacists maintain no direct night presence, but Miss Brooke prepares all controlled doses before leaving." "Everything, it is arranged, organized," Poirot murmured approvingly. "A place of systems. And where systems exist, monsieur, they can be manipulated. This we must never forget." Dr. Rathbone gave a faint nod, as though the thought had been troubling him long before Poirot voiced it. They stopped at a door marked Night Station, authorized personnel only. The doctor opened it and gestured Poirot inside. The night station was small, a compact square room lined with shelving and lockers, with a desk in the center. A black binder lay open there, beside a thermos, an empty mug, and a pair of spectacles folded neatly. The overhead lamp cast a cone of yellowish light across the papers, leaving the edges of the room in comfortable gloom. A young man in a uniform sat at the desk. He had sandy hair, round spectacles, and the kind of earnest expression commonly found in those who take procedures very seriously. Upon seeing the doctor, he stood at once. "Good afternoon, sir." He glanced toward Poirot with curiosity. "And good afternoon to you as well, sir." "Mr. Edgar Price," Dr. Rathbone said. "Night attendant for the private wing. This is Monsieur Poirot. He will be asking you a few questions regarding last night." Edgar Price swallowed, nodded, and made room for Poirot to sit. Poirot declined the chair, preferring to stand and observe. "Monsieur Price," he began softly, "you were the one who discovered Sir Andrew Whitmore this morning at 6 o'clock. "Yes, sir." Price's voice was steady but carried a faint quiver beneath. "I do rounds every 2 hours after midnight. I checked rooms at 2, at 4, and then at 6. And at 2 o'clock, how was Sir Andrew?" "Awake and reading, sir." He asked whether the lights could be dimmed slightly more. "I adjusted them for him." "At 4. He was asleep. Or at least, appeared so. Breathing evenly. No distress." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "And at 6? Price's shoulders tensed. He took a breath to steady himself. "He was lying just as at 4. But the color," he paused, searching for the right words, "was wrong. I called Nurse Dalrymple at once. We attempted resuscitation until Dr. Rathbone arrived, but—" He did not finish. Poirot did not force him to. "You are meticulous, monsieur," Poirot said. "You keep records." Price nodded eagerly, pulling forward the binder. "Yes, sir. Every round documented with time and observations." Poirot scanned the entries. 2 o'clock, patient awake, reading. No complaints. 4 o'clock, patient asleep. No visible distress. 6 o'clock, patient unresponsive. Help summoned. The handwriting was neat, precise, and consistent. Tell me, Poirot continued, on your rounds, did you ever find Sir Andrew attempting to call for assistance? Ringing the bell? Pressing the switch? No, sir. He never used it. Most patients do, even for small discomforts. Sir Andrew only complained during nurse rounds when they came to him. Poirot made a thoughtful sound. And the night was quiet otherwise? No visitors? No disturbances. No disturbances, sir. Visiting hours end at 8. After that, all doors are locked. Staff movements are logged. No exceptions unless there is an emergency. Then, monsieur, perhaps you will show me the log. Price pulled out another binder, thicker than the first. Poirot skinned it, names, times, duties, rounds, all recorded with regimented order. The quiet discipline of a clinic reflected in ink. Poirot paused at one entry, 003, medication delivered to room 14. Nurse Dalrymple. He tapped the line lightly. This corresponds with the sedative. Yes, sir. Price hesitated, and Poirot noticed. You have something to say, monsieur? Price adjusted his spectacles nervously. Only that Nurse Dalrymple is very precise, sir. She logs everything. Some nurses make notes after rounds, but she never delays. She said once that a memory is a traitor, and I suppose she's right. Poirot smiled faintly. Wise words. Many murderers are discovered because memory cannot be trusted. And you, Mr. Price, you notice nothing unusual. No other nurse, attendant, or doctor entering Sir Andrew's room after midnight. Price hesitated again, longer this time. Well, he shifted in his seat. Miss Brooke did come to the ward around 1:45. She doesn't usually come at that hour, sir. Miss Evelyn Brooke, the pharmacist. Yes, sir. Poirot's eye sharpened. And did she give a reason? She said she forgot to file something in the cabinet. She carries keys, it's part of her responsibility. I did not question it, sir. It is not my place. Poirot filed this away carefully. And did she remain long? No, sir. 5, perhaps 6 minutes. She always walks quietly, but last night even more so. I remember because I didn't notice her leave, I only heard the cabinet close. Poirot exchanged a glance with Dr. Rathbone. The doctor looked genuinely surprised. I knew nothing of this, he murmured. Poirot returned his attention to Price. Monsieur, after Miss Brooke departed, did you hear anyone else? No, sir. The wing was silent until morning. Poirot considered this for several seconds before asking, one more question, if you please, when you found Sir Andrew, what was the condition of his bed? Price blinked. Neat, sir. Almost exactly as before. Sheets barely disturbed. That is what struck me most. Most patients toss or shift. Sir Andrew did not. Poirot nodded slowly. A man who would not submit to discomfort in life submits too easily in death. This does not please me. Price looked perplexed, but Dr. Rathbone understood. Poirot continued gently, Mr. Price, how long have you been working at St. Augustine's? Just over a year, sir, he replied. I came from a larger hospital. Less calm there. Less orderly. And do you like it here? He smiled faintly. It is quiet, sir. I prefer quiet. Poirot offered him a courteous bow. Thank you. You have been most helpful." Price sat back down slowly, as though the interview had taken more from him than expected. Outside in the corridor, Poirot and Dr. Rathbone walked silently for several steps before the doctor asked, "Do you suspect Miss Brooke?" Poirot's moustache twitched thoughtfully. "Suspect is a strong word, Doctor. But one does not ignore a woman who visits systems after midnight." "And Nurse Dalrymple?" "Precise. Dutiful. Possibly too conscientious to falsify anything. But she administered the sedative. That places the syringe in her hand." "And Price?" "He sees everything, and interferes in nothing. An ideal witness in some cases, a dangerous one in others. We must consider all." They reached the lift. Poirot stopped before entering and looked down the wing, past the quiet doors, toward the curve of the corridor where the pharmacy lay. "Doctor," he said softly, "I have been in many hospitals. They were filled with cries, arguments, laughter, despair. This clinic is different. Here, death itself walks on tiptoe." Rathbone opened his mouth to reply, but Poirot was not finished. "And when death walks softly, someone has taught him how." Chapter 5: The Pharmaceutic Puzzle. The pharmacy at St. Augustine's Clinic sat at the far end of a quieter corridor, its frosted glass window bearing the single-word dispensary in small, tidy lettering. It was a place, Poirot thought, where power did not shout but whispered through labels and dosages, a room where life and death could be measured in milligrams. Dr. Rathbone rapped gently on the door. "Come in," called a cool, level voice from within. He opened the door and stood aside for Poirot to enter first. The dispensary was narrow but immaculately arranged. Rows of glass-fronted cabinets lined the walls, each shelf bearing bottles and boxes, labeled in a clear, uniform hand. A long counter ran along the center, upon which stood a set of precise scales, a small lamp, a ledger, and a metal tray with a few empty ampoules resting in it. Light filtered through the frosted window, softened and diffused. Behind the counter stood Miss Evelyn Brooke. She was in her late 30s, with dark hair pinned up in an uncompromising style and a face that might have been striking had it not been held in such tight control. Her eyes, grey and cool, moved from Rathbone to Poirot, taking both men in as though they were entries in a record book. "Dr. Rathbone," she said. "Monsieur Poirot. I have been expecting you." Poirot made a small bow. "Ah, mademoiselle, then we save time. You know why I am here. You are here because Sir Andrew Whitmore died, and the simplest explanation does not satisfy the doctor." There was no heat in her tone, merely statement. "And because sedatives and other controlled medications fall under my supervision, you will wish to examine my work." Poirot's eyes twinkled very faintly. "You are a woman of logic. I admire that. It is most helpful to me when people realize at once that Hercule Poirot will look where others would prefer he did not." She did not smile. "I have nothing to hide, Monsieur Poirot. If you wish to inspect the records, you may." "Then perhaps you will begin," Poirot said gently, "by telling me how things are arranged here. I like to understand the little system, you see. The order of the bottles, the rhythm of the records." "Very well." She reached for the large ledger on the counter and opened it at the center. Columns of writing marched down the page in straight, unwavering lines. "All controlled drugs are stored in the cabinet there." She indicated a locked unit on the wall, its glass door reinforced with metal. "Access is limited to myself and Dr. Rathbone. Doses for each patient are prepared in advance where possible, labeled with name, dosage, and time, and placed in the secure drawer until a nurse collects them on their round. Every vial removed is logged here with date, time, patient, and initials of the nurse who took it." Poirot glanced at the cabinet, at the lock, at the single key that hung from a chain at Miss Brooke's waist. "And all this," he said, "you manage alone?" "Yes." That is the safest way. Fewer hands, fewer mistakes. Poirot did not dispute it. And last night? The sedative for Sir Andrew's midnight injection, you prepared it. I did, she replied. At 6 in the evening, along with others for the night. Nurse Dalrymple collected it shortly before midnight. You may see the entry. She turned the ledger a little, pointing to a line written in the same clear hand as all the others. 2355, midazolam 2 milligrams, Sir Andrew Whitmore, collected by Nurse C. the Dalrymple, C.D. Poirot's gaze lingered on the initials, the time, the steady slope of the letters. And the vial itself, mademoiselle, he asked, do you still have it? Her expression cooled a fraction more, if that were possible. I knew you would ask. Yes, it was returned to me this morning after Dr. Rathbone's examination. The ampoules are single-use, but I retained it in case of an inquiry. She moved to a small metal tray near the scales and picked up a slender, empty glass vial, holding it delicately at the base. There is no residue visible, she said. The doctor has already remarked upon this. Poirot reached out a gloved hand. May I? She placed it into his palm. It was light, smooth, and apparently innocent. He held it up to the light, turning it slowly, watching the glass catch the faint glow from the window. To most eyes, it would have appeared entirely clean. But Poirot was not most eyes. Near the neck of the vial, where the liquid would have rested when upright, there was a faint, almost imperceptible line, as though something slightly denser than water had once clung there. Doctor, he said mildly, without looking away from the glass, you told me earlier that the sedative used was midazolam. A standard dose. You are certain? Quite certain, Rathbone replied. I smelt and tested a trace this morning. It was consistent with midazolam. Ah, Poirot murmured. Consistent, yes. But never assume, doctor, that the obvious is the only thing present. It is possible, is it not, to add something to the usual, something in small quantity, perhaps, but of great effect. Miss Brooke's eyes met his, very steady. You're suggesting that the drug was tampered with, she said. Here? In my dispensary. I am suggesting only that Sir Andrew died in a way that does not completely satisfy me, Poirot replied. And when the manner is strange, one must consider all possible routes. If it had been tampered with, she said crisply, it would mean either that I substituted something myself, which I did not, or that someone else gained access to the cabinet and altered one of the vials without my knowledge. That would be difficult. Difficult, Poirot agreed, but not impossible. For example, if someone with a key returned at an unusual hour, when most people slept, to check the cabinet. Dr. Rathbone turned sharply. Is this where you tell me, Miss Brooke, that you? She did not flinch. Yes, I came here around 12:30, she said evenly. I had forgotten to verify a stock count. It occurred to me after I had gone upstairs. I prefer to correct such things at once rather than trust to morning. Poirot lifted a finger. But you did not record this small nocturnal excursion in any log. There is no requirement to log my own presence in the dispensary, she replied. Only the distribution of drugs. Which you did not alter. Poirot pressed. No, there was iron in her tone now. I did not touch Sir Andrew's vial or any other prepared dose. I opened the cabinet, counted a row of ampoules against my list, closed it, and locked it again. That is all. Poirot regarded her for a moment in silence. Mademoiselle, he said at last, you are a very precise woman, I think. Exact, ordered. Such people find chaos intolerable. We are not in the business of chaos here, Monsieur Poirot, she said. Lives depend on precision. Yes. He set the vial gently back on the tray. And sometimes, so does death. He walked along the row of cabinets, hands clasped behind his back, reading the labels: analgesics, cardiovascular, antibiotics, neuromuscular agents. His eyes paused very slightly at the last. "Tell me," he said casually, "do you carry many agents here that affect movement, the muscles, the ability to breathe?" "Of course." Miss Brooke moved to the relevant cabinet. "For surgical procedures, emergency use, controlled settings. They are restricted more highly than most drugs. Only under direct instructions. And they are kept where?" She tapped the glass with one fingertip. "Here. Behind this lock. Every ampoule counted daily." Poirot nodded. "You are thorough, mademoiselle. It is admirable. And yet—" He trailed off deliberately. "And yet," she prompted, unable to resist. "And yet," Poirot said softly, "last night, a man in your clinic ceased to move, ceased to breathe, and did so without raising the least alarm. His bed undisturbed. His call button untouched. One might almost imagine that his body became, all at once, a prison from which he could not signal." Miss Brooke's jaw tightened. "If you are suggesting a neuromuscular block was used, you must know how outrageous that sounds. Such drugs are highly dangerous in untrained hands. They must be monitored." Poirot gave a small, sad smile. "Mademoiselle, murder is often outrageous. It is not reasonable, it is not respectful. But it is sometimes ingenious." He turned away from the cabinet and focused once more on her. "Forgive me," he said, "if I seem to accuse. I do not. I am like the doctor, I seek only understanding. And there is one more thing I must understand, your connection to Sir Andrew Whitmore." Her composure wavered for the first time. "My connection," she repeated. "I had no connection. He was a patient. I dispense medication to patients, not opinions." "Yet his business affairs, they touched your world also," Poirot said softly. "He was attempting to swallow Whitmore and Kenton. I am told that company has many smaller partners, investors, associates." She stared at him now, eyes sharp. "And among those listed," Poirot continued mildly, "is a small pharmaceutical supplier in the provinces. Brooke and Haynes, I believe." A flush rose in her cheeks. "That is my family's concern," she said stiffly. "My father's company. Not mine." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "But when a big fish eats the small fish, mademoiselle, the whole pond feels the shock, does it not?" She drew herself up. "If you are here to imply that I would risk my profession, my liberty, and my soul over a business quarrel, then perhaps we have said enough." Poirot inclined his head. "I imply nothing. I collect facts. It is my habit. You prepare the sedatives. You control the dangerous drugs. You are linked, however indirectly, to a firm that would suffer from Sir Andrew's plans. You returned here at 12:30 last night, at an hour when most are in bed. These are facts. How they join, that is for later." "Then you had better be very sure of your joins, Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly. "Because I will not have my work smeared by suspicion without proof." He looked at her for a long moment, not unkindly. "Proof, mademoiselle," he said, "has a curious way of emerging when the little grey cells are given time to work." He turned back to the counter, his gaze resting once more on the empty vial, on the faint line inside the glass. "In the end," Poirot murmured almost to himself, "a bottle is but a container. It holds what someone chooses to put into it. As does a room. As does a hospital. As does a lie." Dr. Rathbone shifted uneasily, as though the room had grown colder. Poirot straightened his tie. "Come, doctor," he said briskly. We have met the lady of the medicines. Now we must meet again the man of the money. And who is that? Rathbone asked. Why, Sir Andrew's heir, of course, Poirot replied. Mr. Charles Whitmore. I think it is time we asked him how he feels about inheritances that arrive ahead of schedule. And with that, he left the dispensary, the faint echo of glass and labels remaining in his mind like a subtle aftertaste. Chapter 6: Suspicions in Conflict. Charles Whitmore arrived at St. Augustine's Clinic just before 4 in the afternoon, bringing with him a gust of expensive cologne, wet umbrella, and the sort of restless energy that made Poirot think immediately of racehorses trained for performance rather than endurance. He was 32, fashionable, and carried ambition like a well-tailored coat. He strode into the reception hall and barely muttered more than his name before demanding to see Dr. Rathbone. The nurse at the desk, startled, hurriedly stood and gestured for him to wait. Poirot watched him in silence from a seat nearby. He always watched before he questioned. A man betrayed far more when he believed himself unobserved. Charles flung the umbrella aside into a stand, unbuttoned his coat with impatience, and checked his watch twice within a minute. His foot tapped, his fingers drummed the arm of the chair, and the lines around his mouth held both frustration and disbelief. Poirot thought, this is not the face of grief. But then, grief wears many masks, some weeping, some furious, some merely inconvenienced. At last Dr. Rathbone emerged from the corridor. Mr. Whitmore, I am sorry you had to learn of your uncle's passing in such a fashion. Charles stood immediately. Doctor, what happened? My uncle was recovering. I spoke to him last night. He was irritatingly alive, I assure you. Poirot watched Rathbone suppress a grim smile. Yes, Sir Andrew appeared stable. His death was unexpected. Unexpected. Charles snapped. Unexpected deaths do not happen in private clinics that cost 500 guineas a week. Poirot rose smoothly. Unless, monsieur, someone finds it convenient that they should. Charles turned sharply, noticing Poirot for the first time. And who are you? Hercule Poirot, said the detective, bowing slightly, at your service, monsieur. Recognition dawned on the young man's face, accompanied by a cautionary narrowing of the eyes. My uncle greatly admired your reputation, though he would have hated needing your services. Poirot smiled. Often the dead require more of us than the living. Rathbone gestured toward his office. Perhaps we will speak privately. Inside, the office was as orderly as before. Charles declined to sit, pacing instead before the window like a caged cat. Monsieur, Poirot began, you visited your uncle last evening. At what hour? Just after 8. Visiting hours were nearly over. And how was your conversation? Charles barked a bitter laugh. The usual. He insulted my business proposals, said I lacked vision, suggested that I possessed the strategic instincts of a cabbage, and then forbade me from contacting potential investors without his approval. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Ah. A pleasant family exchange. Rathbone asked, did he mention his health? He claimed he was bored and that boredom was worse for the heart than cholesterol. Charles paused, then added more quietly, but he did not seem ill. I'll give him that. Irritating as ever. Poirot folded his arms behind his back. And you, monsieur, did you have quarrel with him recently? Outside the hospital? Charles stopped pacing. Does anyone deal with Sir Andrew Whitmore without quarrelling? He lived for conflict. But yes, if you insist on particulars, we argued about the merger 2 weeks ago. I told him dismantling Whitmore and Kenton would ruin 3 smaller pharmaceutical suppliers who depended on the parent firm. He told me business had no duty to sentiment. Poirot glanced briefly at Rathbone, who stiffened almost imperceptibly. And then? Poirot prompted. And then, Charles finished, he threatened to replace me on the board. Poirot allowed a soft sigh. And did you, perhaps, threaten him also? Charles hesitated just long enough for the truth to gleam through the cracks. I might have suggested that he'd destroy his own legacy before I'd let him destroy the company. But it was bluster. Boardroom tempers. Nothing more. Poirot did not contradict him. Bluster, he knew, had killed more men than bullets when mixed with the right opportunity. Tell me, monsieur, Poirot said casually, your uncle intended to revise his will. At that, Charles's expression shifted, irritation giving way to wariness. Who told you that? Let us say, Poirot answered, that the dead sometimes leave their affairs arranged in a manner that others would prefer to examine. Charles swallowed. He hadn't signed anything yet. He only said I'd be rewarded for competence if he deemed me competent enough by the end of the quarter. It was typical of him, rewarding loyalty with delay. And Lady Whitmore? Poirot asked. How did she stand to fare in these matters? Charles laughed again, but the laughter carried contempt rather than humor. My aunt? She has an allowance, property, and the house in Surrey. Andrew would never disinherit her. But she would never control the company. He trusted her taste in furniture, not finance. Poirot filed that away quietly. Now, monsieur, Poirot continued, consider that Sir Andrew dies during a period of extraordinary tension, personal, financial, corporate. He dies without pressing the bell, without disturbing the sheets, without making the slightest struggle. Does this strike you as natural? Charles frowned for the first time. No. Andrew would not go quietly even into a coma. Poirot nodded. Just so. And yet quiet he went. There was silence, the kind that settled slowly, like snow. Poirot resumed. Let us speak of others connected to the case. Charles leaned against the desk. Such as? The pharmacist, Miss Brooke. Charles blinked. Evelyn? She's a chemist. Serious, unremarkable, terrifyingly precise. My uncle would have loathed her if he had noticed her. But he did notice Brooke and Haynes, Poirot said softly. A small supplier threatened by the merger. Charles stiffened. Yes. And father invested in it years ago. Evelyn's brother runs the manufacturing side. But that hardly makes her a murderer. Poirot did not argue, which was, in his experience, more persuasive than argument. And the nurse, Miss Dalrymple? Poirot asked. Harmless, Charles said. Timid as a dormouse. She apologized twice for taking my temperature when I had influenza last winter. And the night attendant? Price? Charles shrugged. A nonentity. If the clinic were a theatre, Price would move the scenery. Poirot found the observation unexpectedly astute. And Lady Whitmore, the detective asked last. Charles hesitated longer here. My aunt, he said slowly, deserves credit. She endured my uncle. Few women had the stamina. But do not imagine the lady is weak. She survived him. That is its own form of competence. Poirot smiled. You speak of her with a curious respect. I respect anyone who can navigate power without possessing any of it. She learned to bend without breaking. Poirot revised that mental note as well. At length, Charles stood straight again, buttoning his coat. Is my uncle being autopsied? That depends, Dr. Rathbone replied. Lady Whitmore must agree, unless there is official suspicion. And is there? Charles asked pointedly. Poirot answered for him. Monsieur, there is something worse than suspicion. There is inconsistency. A natural death must behave naturally. This one does not. Charles inhaled sharply. If someone killed him, he said, it will not be for mercy. It will be for advantage. You may depend upon that. Poirot bowed slightly. In murder, monsieur, one may always depend upon motive. It is the method that surprises us. Charles left then, without waiting to be dismissed. The door closed behind him. Rathbone exhaled slowly. Good Lord. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. You observe, Doctor, that Charles points outward, to corporations, to pharmacists, to the widow. That is his instinct. He does not look inward. Rathbone asked, do you think him innocent? Poirot smiled faintly. I think him young. And in murders involving business, youth is seldom the sharpest knife in the drawer. He walked toward the window, where rain streaked the panes in thin rivulets. We have now the picture, Doctor, with the outlines clear. A man dies who ought not to die. He dies in silence. He dies at a moment of high financial stakes. He dies with no alarm, no struggle, no witness. Poirot turned back, eyes bright as polished steel. Now, Doctor, we must determine the central question, who benefits from a death so quiet that the dead man cannot even press a bell? Chapter 7, A Clue in the Quiet. That evening, the halls of St. Augustine seemed softer, darker, and somehow more reflective than before. Rain tapped rhythmically against the long windows, turning the gardens outside into pools of black glass. The nurses moved like quiet wraiths, the lamps were dimmed to protect the resting, and the scent of antiseptic grew sharper in the night air. It was, Poirot thought, the kind of night in which secrets felt safe. He walked alone down the private wing, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor. His hands were folded neatly behind his back, his expression composed. But his little grey cells were everything but tranquil. He paused before the door to room 14 and opened it without knocking. The room awaited him with the stillness of a wax museum, as if the drama of the morning had not happened at all, as if the bed might yet hold a patient who would awaken and ring for tea. Poirot switched on the bedside lamp, casting a warm circle of light upon the pillows. He drew the chair closer and sat down, facing the empty bed like one would face a witness. My friend, he said softly to the absent Sir Andrew, you have died in a manner most inconvenient. The doctors call it a mystery. The family calls it unfortunate. But to me? Ah, to me it calls out the murder. He leaned forward, fingers steepled. What is murder? It is not merely death. It is the removal of choice. He stood, smoothing his waistcoat, and moved first to the call panel. He pressed the button. A clear chime sounded at the nurse's station. Efficient. Impossible to miss. Good, Poirot murmured. We test the obvious. Next he drew back the sheet on the bed and examined the mattress. The linen bore faint creases where the body had rested, but not the crumpled impressions of a man wrestling for breath. Poirot touched the pillow lightly, pressing downward. It was soft and elastic. It held impressions easily. He turned it over. A faint indentation ran diagonally across the feathers, not deep, not obvious, but distinct enough for one who knew where to look. Not the struggle, Poirot whispered, but the pressure. He placed the pillow down and sat again. In a natural death by heart failure, we expect motion. The hand to the chest. The gasp for air. Perhaps the arm extended. But in suffocation there is chaos. Sheets are pulled, pillows displaced, alarms rung. And yet, he gestured at the calm room. Nothing. His eye settled again on the bedside table. The glass untouched. The water level unchanged. The pen still uncapped beside the newspaper. Sir Andrew had not even set it down deliberately. That, to Poirot, was more telling than any scream. A man drinks when he is restless. A man rings when he is afraid. A man squeezes his pillow when he fights. But a man who cannot move, he let the conclusion hang in the air like smoke. He stood and crossed to the wardrobe, retrieving the briefcase once more. He did not need to examine the letters again. He had already extracted from them the necessary emotional contours: distrust, ambition, resentment, and the cold arithmetic of business. He replaced the case and closed the wardrobe door with a gentle click. Once, in a case I knew long ago, Poirot murmured to himself, a soldier was killed with a cuirass dart. His body was found as though asleep. No struggle. No alarm. Only the eyes, wide open. He paused. And in another, a surgeon used succinylcholine to silence a witness during a procedure. Again, no struggle. No noise. The lungs, they sat like stone. He tapped the cabinet lightly with his knuckles. Succinylcholine. A paralytic. And our clinic, how do they store such substances? He left the room and made his way toward the pharmacy corridor once more. It was after 9 now. Miss Brooke would have gone home. The door to the dispensary was locked, as expected. Poirot examined the lock for a long moment. He did not pick it. He did not need to. Instead he leaned close, observing the metal. It was unscratched. Not recently forced. Good. Forced entries left scars. He jotted a note and continued toward the night station, where Mr. Price sat updating the logs. "Ah, monsieur," Poirot said softly, "I apologize for disturbing you once more. Tell me, if you would, of the procedure for emergency anesthesia." Price blinked behind his spectacles. "Emergency? That would require Dr. Rathbone's authorization, sir. No anesthesia is given without a doctor. And the paralytic agents? For surgeries. Also locked, sir. Miss Brooke manages inventory. If a procedure is scheduled, she prepares the tray." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And last night, no operations?" "No, sir. None at all." The surgical wing slept. Poirot offered a small smile. A hospital that sleeps, is that not a remarkable sentence? Price had no idea whether he should laugh, so he didn't. Back in the private wing, Poirot found Nurse Dalrymple at her desk. She looked up almost anxiously. "Monsieur Poirot, is something wrong?" "On the contrary," Poirot said, "something is becoming right. And that, to me, is more alarming than the wrong." She blinked. "I'm not sure I follow. When you administered the sedative last night," Poirot asked, "was Sir Andrew awake?" "Yes." "He complained. But he accepted it." "And how long before he slept?" "Perhaps 20 minutes. He put down his paper. Closed his eyes." "Slowly? Or suddenly?" Dalrymple frowned, thinking. "Now that you ask, somewhat suddenly. I assumed he was more tired than he admitted." Poirot nodded. "And after he fell asleep, did you observe him again before 4? "No. We only check every 2 hours." Poirot thanked her and excused himself. He needed solitude. Outside, he walked to the small conservatory at the end of the corridor, a glass room filled with potted plants and wicker chairs, designed to soothe convalescents. Tonight it soothed only the detective. He sat down, eyes closing briefly. Now the pieces began to settle. No struggle. No alarm. Sudden onset sleep. Paralysis matching signs. Access to pharmacologic agents. Corporate motive. Financial reallocation. No signs of natural decline. He opened his eyes. To kill a man silently, Poirot whispered, one must first take away his voice. He stood abruptly. Now, he said to the empty conservatory, we know how the man was killed. The who, are, that is child's play, once the how is secure. He checked his watch. There was still time. He went to Dr. Rathbone's office, knocked once, and entered. The doctor was alone, reading through paperwork with the weariness of a man who had lived 24 hours in 12. Doctor, Poirot said, it is time to arrange a meeting. Tomorrow morning, if you please. All interested parties present, Lady Whitmore, Mr. Charles, Nurse Dalrymple, Miss Brooke, and Mr. Price. Rathbone stared. A meeting? Whatever for? For the truth, Poirot replied. It must be told while the air still trembles with possibility. And will you reveal what you've learned? Poirot smiled slowly. But of course, Doctor. Tomorrow, Hercule Poirot will speak. And I promise you, no one will sleep quietly after that. Chapter 8, The Revelation in the Ward. The next morning dawned with a crisp, indifferent brightness, as though the world outside had no interest at all in the affairs of St. Augustine's clinic. The lawns glistened with dew, the sky had shaken off the rain, and nurses moved briskly along the corridors as patients complained of tea, pillows, or boredom. Only in the private wing did a slight tension hang, like a veil someone had forgotten to remove. Dr. Rathbone had arranged the meeting exactly as Poirot requested. They gathered in the same private ward where Sir Andrew Whitmore had died, a choice Poirot insisted upon, declaring that crime must be confronted in the theatre of its performance. Lady Whitmore sat near the window, composed as ever, fingers wrapped around a handkerchief that had not yet touched her eyes. Charles Whitmore stood by the wardrobe, arms folded, jaw tight, impatience barely disguised. Nurse Dalrymple perched near the bedside table, pale and uneasy, while Edgar Price took a seat near the door, spectacles fogged slightly from the cold outside. Miss Brooke stood apart from the rest, her posture rigid, her expression a carefully blank wall. Dr. Rathbone hovered awkwardly by the foot of the bed until Poirot gestured for him to sit. Poirot himself stood at the centre of the room, hands clasped, waistcoat immaculate, moustache immaculata. He began without theatrics, but with a calm that drew every ear. My friends, he said, we are gathered here to speak of a death. Not a natural death, not an expected death, but one that came upon a man who, by every medical account, was stable, improving, and in possession of a constitution that would carry him well beyond the night. He gestured to the empty bed. And yet, voila! Sir Andrew did not survive until morning. Lady Whitmore spoke first, her voice cool. We know all that, Monsieur Poirot. The question is why? And how? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, madam, precisely. Those are indeed the questions. And I propose to answer them, but permit me to begin with the final piece rather than the first. He pointed to the call bell on the panel beside the bed. In every natural or sudden death I have encountered in a hospital, heart failure, pulmonary embolism, arrhythmia, there is motion. The hand reaches for assistance. The sheets are disturbed. The body reacts. But Sir Andrew? He lies as though put to bed by a nurse. The pillow scarcely shifted. The sheets unwrinkled. The water glass untouched. Charles frowned. All right, but what does that imply? That Sir Andrew did not move, Poirot replied. He did not struggle, did not gasp, did not summon help, did not signal distress. He died as a statue dies, not because the death was painless, but because the body was rendered incapable of movement. A ripple moved through the room. Rathbone inhaled sharply. You're suggesting paralysis. Poirot nodded. Not the paralysis of stroke or degeneration, but pharmacological paralysis. A substance which leaves the mind awake, the lungs silent, and the muscles in revolt. Miss Brooke's eyes narrowed. You are referring to neuromuscular blocking agents. Just so, Poirot said. Agents such as succinylcholine. Odorless. Fast-acting. Disappearing from the body with speed. Administered as easily as any sedative. Nurse Dalrymple blanched behind her hand. Lady Whitmore raised an eyebrow. And who, Monsieur Poirot, could possibly administer such a thing? This is not a village bakery. Access is limited. Poirot spread his hands. Exactly, madam. Access is the key. Let us consider who had it. He raised a finger. First, the nurses. They handle injections, but not the drugs themselves. Doses are dispensed to them ready prepared. They have the opportunity to deliver, but not to alter. He turned to Dalrymple. Mademoiselle Dalrymple administered the sedative, yes, but she had no ability to replace or contaminate it. Dalrymple swallowed and nodded vigorously, relief flooding her face. Poirot raised another finger. Second, the night attendant. Monsieur Price walks the halls, logs the rounds, sees but does not inject. He lacks both access and method. Price nodded, though his hand shook slightly with tension. Poirot shifted to Charles. Third, the heir. You, monsieur, had motive to prevent your uncle from destroying his own company and perhaps your future. But you lack the pharmacological skill, the access to neuromuscular agents, and indeed the courage to perform such a murder. Charles bristled, then resignedly muttered, fair enough. Poirot turned to Lady Whitmore. Fourth, the widow. You had motive of a different nature, a life made tolerable by survival rather than affection. But again, no access. No knowledge of these drugs. And you left at 8 o'clock, long before the moment of the deed. Lady Whitmore's lips pursed. The flattery of being accused and exonerated simultaneously suited her temperament. Poirot paused. Silence thickened. And at last, we come to the pharmacist. Every head turned toward Miss Brooke. She did not flinch, but her chin raised slightly, as though bracing for impact. Poirot continued gently. Mademoiselle Brooke possesses everything the others lack, knowledge of paralytics, access to them, the means to dispense drugs within the system, and, most importantly, a personal motive. Miss Brooke's voice was steady. My only motive is accuracy. You're building castles in the air, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's eyes softened. Is that so? Then allow me to furnish those castles with furniture, that they may seem more like homes. He lifted the empty vial from the bedside table, enclosed now in a small plastic bag. This vial held the sedative. The doctor tested it and found midazolam. But the faint ring near the neck shows that another substance adhered briefly to the glass. A substance more viscous than a simple benzodiazepine. I recognized it because I have seen it before. Rathbone murmured, my God. Poirot pressed onward. And why administer a paralytic to Sir Andrew? Why silence him? Because his death was needed to halt the takeover that would have swallowed Brooke and Haynes, a company your family depends upon. Miss Brooke's eyes flashed. That company employs 200 people. Sir Andrew would have raised it without a thought. Poirot inclined his head. And in return, you raised him. You returned to the pharmacy after midnight. Mr. Price heard you open and close the cabinet. You did not alter records because to record would create evidence. Instead, you prepared a single vial, identical to the others, containing midazolam mixed with succinylcholine. A perfect combination, the sedative to lull, the paralytic to silence. Price whispered, horrified, then at 4 o'clock, he was alive, but he couldn't move. Poirot nodded sadly. Alive and aware, monsieur. But with lungs that would not expand. And a voice he could not use. He suffocated in perfect silence. Miss Brooke's lips trembled then, not with fear but fury. He was a tyrant, she spat. He crushed livelihoods the way men crush insects. And all of you, she looked around the room with blazing contempt, looked away and called it business. Poirot's voice softened, almost mournful. Mademoiselle, many men deserve judgment. But murder is not commerce. It is final. She turned her face away. I regret nothing. Poirot bowed his head. Then there is nothing more to say, except that justice will now take the matter from your hands. As Miss Brooke was escorted from the room hours later, Lady Whitmore watched with unreadable eyes. Charles stared at the floor, pale and shaken. Nurse Dalrymple cried quietly. Dr. Rathbone sank into a chair, looking suddenly older. Poirot alone remained composed. As he left the clinic entrance, the spring sunlight warmed his face. He paused, adjusting his hat. So often, he murmured, murder is committed not by the wicked, but by the righteous who run out of patience. Then he walked away, and the doors of St. Augustine swung shut behind him.